Well, hello and welcome to Workplace Athletes Train Like Champions webinar today. In case we haven't met, my name is Holly Foxworth. I am a registered nurse and I am the marketing manager for content here at Axiom. We have a fantastic panel that is actually joining us today. You're going to love hearing from them. So that includes Professor Andy, Dr. Andy Galphin. I had to practice before. You know, we say those names right before so that we can maybe get them right whenever we go live. But we have Andy that's going to be joining us, and then also we have our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Scott Cherry, of course, our Chief Marketing Officer, Dara Wheeler. And so we'll do some introductions in just a moment before we get started. But before we do that, I did want to bring your attention to this the next event that we have that's coming up. And so it actually is going to include a topic that's kind of sensitive. It's kind of sensitive. It's not really an easy conversation to have, but we think it's one that needs to be had. And so we're going to be going through kind of the what's driving some of these larger events, the irrational thoughts, the behaviors, and that ultimately lead to some of these mass casualty shootings or events, whatever you want to refer to them as. But I think that there's a lot that's going on there. We all have heavy hearts about what is taking place in the workplace, whether you're in public. You know, that it doesn't appear to have much of a differentiation there. It can happen anywhere. So I think that having those conversations would be great. So we hope that you will join us for that. The way that you can get registered for that actually is just going there to the top of your screen. You should see that button that says register now. You just simply press that. That gets you registered. We'll send you the invite. There's nothing else that you have to do on your part by that point. Just click the link and we will see you there at the event. Second thing, right there at the bottom, that's where we call the resource list that has all of the information that you may need or that you want to refer to. So that would include a copy of today's slide decks. We have also a hot off the press new white paper that goes to heat-related illness prevention. And so that covers everything from the workplace to acclimation to all the various different techniques that you may want to consider there when you're looking for your plan. Here in Texas, it has been extremely warm already. I'm sure it is where you are as well. So any steps that we can take to save lives, protect people from getting ill, including our family and pets, everything included, I think it's a step in the right direction. So you're welcome to have that, along with the final thing that should be in there is the information about Simpo Live, which is our mental behavioral health support service that really brings everything together under one roof and works very well with our additional programs, including the instant case management and occupational health programs, you know, CREA for the contagious illness, et cetera. So if you have any of those questions, let us know, but those are all you. And the final thing I will say is that if you haven't figured it out, we love to talk. We like non-stuffy environments. We like open dialogue. So if you have a question that you want to ask away. If you have a comment that you want to share, we welcome those as well. If you want to say something, but you need to be anonymous, you don't want your name, simply type that right there in that box, and I'll make for sure that we don't include your name that's with that. The backside of that is that I have actually been sending gifts to those that come up with the best questions. So there definitely is a reward that comes along with that. But we love to hear what's going on in your workplace, your environment, and learn together. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our team then for introductions. Dr. Tree, we'll start with you. Dara will come to you second, and then Andy will come to you third. Dr. Cherry?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Scott Cherry. I'm Axiom Medical's Chief Medical Officer. My professional background is I'm board certified in preventive medicine, public health, and occupational environmental medicine. And I've been supporting the U.S. military, corporate, and industrial operations for the past 15 years. And it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Love it. Thank you. And Dara?
Thanks, Holly. My name is Dara Wheeler. I'm Axiom's less exciting CMO. I'm the other CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer, but I've been with Axiom for about 16 years and living and breathing this world of occupational health and medicine, but really excited to have our guest, Dr. Galphin, here today. So Andy, if you want to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, I have to tell you all a little bit of insider information here. Dara happens to basically be family. So I don't know if I qualify to be here or not, but she brought me in as a insider family here.
We don't have to talk about that.
my day job is I am a full professor at Cal State Fullerton. I have a Ph.D. in human bioenergetics, and I run our Center for Sport Performance. So we have a bunch of laboratories that produce and disseminate research on anything that we believe could enhance human performance. In addition to that, I work with a lot of professional athletes directly in all areas human performance. So I work with NBA players, Olympic gold medalists, NFL players, UFC fighters, world champions across the board. So I've worked with the number one player in the world in 4 of the major sports in America. So a pretty good amount of experience in both research as well as application of high performance. And this includes tackling a bunch of problems like sleep and hydration and recovery and everything else like that. So I think we're going to have a little bit of discussion around those things today, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, we are so tickled to have you here, and thanks for joining us. Well, as we kind of move in that direction, let's just kind of go through what we will be covering, and just so you have an idea here. So we're going to kind of talk through what those modern day every business seems to be facing. We'll go through why change is really the only choice that you arrive at. We're going to talk about some of the brain versus body prioritization when you're looking at maximizing performance. And then we will cover science-based solutions, which Dr. Galphin will be a huge piece of that, along with how it is that you have to embrace and basically adopt that mindset of the workplace athlete and champion there. So let's kind of get started with, before we get into some of the other pieces, I like to ask, how did we even arrive at this place? And so I'll kind of come to you, Darren, and Dr. Cherry as well. How did we get here? What's going on? How we arrived at this place where it's like we had normal lives before, and now we feel like that we're in a completely different scenario. Every business is like throwing their hands up saying, okay, this isn't working. What do we do next?
Yeah, I'll kick it off and then pass over to Scott. So, I think especially the last 2.5 years have been really interesting, but even before that, so Dr. Cherry and I have talked for years about total worker health and that approach, and how do we affect change in the workplace without addressing kind of everything. I think that for years and years, cultures and safety and health have done a lot to address very specific areas, but there have been a lot of areas that haven't been addressed, and I know we'll jump into one of those that comes to mind, which is sleep. But I do think if we look at the last couple of years, dealing with a pandemic and dealing with shutdown and then reopen, dealing with companies that had to maintain operations through that has not necessarily changed what we've been dealing with, but has definitely highlighted things that maybe we weren't dealing with before very well. And I think that for us, it's been, okay, again, what are we doing here? And how do we come back from this with some improved health outcomes? And I think that's been really challenging for businesses. So I'll kick it over to Scott, kind of, get a little bit more into the details of what's going on.
The way I've been thinking about it, along the lines with what Dara had stated, was the pandemic really exacerbated a chronic and maybe even insidious trends in our workforce population health metrics. And so what we've been seeing for the past 2 decades is that on average, the average worker who does physically demanding work, who goes through like a functional capacity evaluation, their overall strength measures have been decreasing year after year, and actually going on for about 20 years. And at the same time, the average weight of those employees are actually going up. So you're seeing these trends of kind of power to weight, which are not favorable, especially for physically demanding work. And so our partners along those lines that do this testing, really have been precisely measuring this for years. And so it is quite alarming. But what happened in the last 2 years really dramatically exacerbated those trends. And so now we're seeing kind of the average weight gain for those who did gain weight could be up to 30 to 40 pounds. And similarly, a decrease in their strength with the lockdowns. And so this is really a negatively synergistic kind of contributor to the concern for workplace health and safety. And, obviously COVID has been driving this pretty significantly. And, as we think about how COVID continues to kind of ebb and flow, obviously Omicron recently was this massive surge with up to, probably 800,000 test positive cases per day in the US. And, we've come down to about 20,000 cases per day about 6 weeks ago or so. But we are starting to see that tick up quite significantly. And a lot of the formal labs doing this testing are now showing test positive rates up to 30%, which is really not promising. So what's really important is to really start identifying that there is this critical need to address total worker health and how to move forward as efficiently as possible.
Totally agree. So would it be safe to say that at this point, then it's not just an issue of employee health, it's every persona, everybody that's in the organization that's really at a loss here. You've got inflation, so you've got operating expenses that are increasing. You can't find staff, and the staff that is there, they may be new, they don't have training, the same type of background as what maybe the prior employees did. And then you've got this incredibly competitive work environment that is in competition and trying to find able bodies.
Yeah, the labor force has been shrinking with this kind of phenomenon called the Great Resignation. And so I think we are seeing a further and further contraction of available workforce. I know the military is also considering this a national security concern, as there's less and less available potential applicants that are going to meet the early requirements for accession into the military. And so I really think of this as a concern for continuity of operations for every business, especially those that are doing physically demanding work or safety sensitive work, but it can be for, even sedentary office workers as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
That was going to be actually one of my questions for both of you. When we think about our populations, we often are thinking about our guys out in the field, really physically demanding jobs. But, we've heard some of these headlines over the last few years of the fact that like sitting at a desk like we all are is probably worse for our health than smoking. And you always hear those big splashy headlines. Andy, I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Like, as we have all gone to work from home, I've actually found that my steps in general have decreased pretty significantly, because if I was in the office, I'd be running around the whole day and chatting with people and talking. If I'm at home, I'm going from desk to bed to kitchen. That's about it. So is that, in your research or the work you guys are doing, have you seen any of that impact just in people's health in general?
Yeah, look, the way that you want to separate this is into two general categories. One of them is basic physical activity, and the other is exercise. So in the case of sitting, that has removed that very first part, which is just your baseline general physical activity. And that is important to restore for basic health. In fact, for a lot of folks, that's even more important than the second one of exercise. So if you're getting exercise, you can handle a little bit of a deload of the physical activity. But if you're not exercising really hard and you become very inactive, now you're in a recipe for bad physical health. It's not that sitting per se is bad for you, it's lack of movement. So when you look at actually a lot of the data, you'll see that standing the full time too is not that great either. What people tend to do the best is a combination of movement. So sit, stand, move. That actually tends to be the best, and it's the most sustainable. Some people who actually don't have great positioning will actually, if they move to like a stand-up desk, they'll get low back injuries. They'll get knee pain because they're not actually standing well. They don't know how to brace and load themselves properly. So what you want to generally do is provide people with the option. So my desk is a variable desk. I can stand for a few minutes. I can sit for a few minutes. I can move around. That is a very easy solution, number one. Number two is, can you integrate some basic movement patterns into your day? So can you set at least 2 of your calls up so you do that while you're walking? Can you do other things? Can you have your quiet reflection time? And you can reestablish some basic movement stuff. For me, this is a 10-minute walk in the morning. It's one of the first things we do. You get out and you can get some of those things done. If you can do some snacks, is the way that we think about it. So every time you want an actual physical snack, do it while walking. And that gets you a 7-minute walk or something while you eat your apple, etc. So just think, if I'm snacking, I'm moving. Little things like that can really help you move, and those will pay a big dividend in your as well.
And your dogs. We need to walk the dogs every day. Right?
Sorry, can you hear it?
Yeah, we
it's
can
actually
hear
currently
them
killing
fighting.
the bed. No, it's one dog who's killing.
It's the beauty of being at home. Yeah, the work from home, remote work story.
Look like he's getting his movement in.
Yeah, he's getting his steps in.
Yeah.
I was going to ask.
Grappling.
I was going to ask that too, because I've heard that as a good tip, just to take calls while walking, or just to get out and do something.
Yeah, I actually, if I'm being honest with you, I spend hours a day walking, because I do almost all of my calls exclusively while walking.
Ooh.
I even do, to be totally honest, I do a lot of podcasts and interviews and media stuff while I'm walking. I chose to sit in front of my computer and be totally as focused as I've ever been for this one. But I will do a lot of them while I'm on the move.
I love it. So, Derek, what I'm understanding you say in the questions that you had asked there was that what happened before, how would things previously, that's not going to work this time. We need to look in different areas.
Yeah, and I think to Scott's point, I think what we're hearing about the labor market, it's not necessarily a great resignation. It's a great reorganization. And I think that's the piece that we have to think about as from our employer standpoint. You know, we're in this world of employers and working with employers to create good programs and sustainable programs. I think that's the piece that we have to pay attention to. It's not necessarily losing our labor market. It's that our labor market's demanding something different from us. And I think that, you know, Scott hit on a couple of pieces there, and Holly did too, but I think this is the piece that as employers, creating sustainable programs that address physical, mental, emotional health, all of these different components are really what we're talking about here, and how to do it differently, because it is just a different environment that we're dealing with today.
Yeah, definitely. One of the like that we get it here on the wire, we hear it from clients, and you know, in fact, actually, I noticed that Tim in here, he was asking about you know, some of the breathing exercises and things like that, mindfulness. So we're going to get to that, Tim. But employers want to know where do I need to start if I don't have a lot of resources and I have a small. I'm operating on a lower amount of budget that's available here. Where is it that I put my biggest prioritization whenever I'm looking at maximizing performance? So that's really kind of where we arrive at this mind and body debate. Dr. Cherry, you want to add anything to that, or what's your thoughts here?
And maybe what I'll start off with is there is this kind of discussion in human performance, and this is absent Dr. Galpin's opinion. We haven't previously discussed, so he may have an alternate opinion. But, you know, you really need to have this total approach of mind and body. I do think there are studies that show if your mind is actively engaged, if it's well rested, that your physical performance dramatically improves, and vice versa. If you had a very mentally straining day or emotionally straining day, then your physical performance, even if all of the biometrics are there to say that you're recovered, otherwise your performance usually is decremented. And so I think for every organization out there, depending on their employee populations and their type of work they do, I mean, if they're safety sensitive, it may be, I mean, it's probably a balance still, because we think of maximizing productivity, but also preventing injuries. And all of those have to do with mental and physical fatigue. And so I kind of like just to say those comments to prime Dr. Galpin to see what his thoughts are with regard to kind of the workforce along these lines. Yeah,
so it depends on how excited y'all want me to get here, and how far you want to go. But in general, it's a false dichotomy. Exactly like Seth got. It's not something you worry about. I could give you 100 examples of why, but the easy way to think about this is physiology regulates psychology, and psychology regulates physiology. This is bidirectional. And what this means, if I gave you some really bad news and walked in and told you you're fired, you will see a physiological response. I can measure that with the biomarkers we take, everything from HRV or things that we use to determine whether an athlete's ready for the day. Some of these things you may have heard. These will change very quickly in response to any psychological up or down tick. If you saw a really inspirational commercial or promo or trailer, like these things alone can cause a physiological change. And I don't just mean an acute adrenaline response. I mean an actual change that will last throughout the rest of the day. I will see those things in our biomarkers. In the other direction, I can put you through a basic 2-minute breathing drill. Going back to, you just brought this up, so this made me think of breathing. And I can change your psychological state. I can give you more anxiety. I can give you more focus. I can go to calm, whatever I want to do here. So I can induce different psychological states with a very small physiological change. We can do this in a whole host of areas. In fact, one of my primary jobs with professional athletes is to do this, right? So I am way too aroused. Like, I'm too excited. How do I come back down? I'm in the tanks. I'm not feeling recovered. So whether they're giving me a psychological issue or they're giving me a physiological one, I have to be able to give them solutions that are both what we call acute and chronic. So can you fix me right now so I can go and play, go into my meeting, whatever we have to do? And can you make this so that my baseline is higher over time? And we have a whole host of solutions to get into that. So the distinction between body and brain to me is almost effectively useless. Sorry if I'm offending anybody, but this is the same thing to me. One directly, we know of, I can tell you the mechanisms physiologically of what are doing those things. So we have them, we've measured them, we've published papers on them. We know that things like CO2, I can actually do a quick test, which you may want to look up, called a CO2 Tolerance Test. This takes under a minute or so. We actually do this with the military a lot. Other folks, it's a daily test you can do. It's a basic like a breathable test. And we've seen in my lab that actually can predict both state and trait anxiety. So the difference here being like how much you're experiencing in this current moment versus how much you generally experience anxiety kind of across time. And that test will tell you that. And so we can quickly figure out people that are kind of toast and say, hey, you're about to go in this very dangerous work site thing. You're going to be doing this really dangerous job today. You're going to have this very tough decision, whatever it's going to be. We did our CO2 tolerance test. You're in a really bad spot. Let's go fix this quick before you go out, right? We do this with athletes before the game, especially in military. It's sort of like everyone does it, and everyone goes, oh, you're shot today. Either you're not doing that job, or we're going to do something else right now to fix it, to establish some improvement before we send you out to do this really dangerous or important task. So the distinction to me is totally irrelevant. What you want to do is improve the human performance. And this comes from both sides of this equation. If you are better physically, you'll make better decisions. If you're in a better state mentally, you'll perform better physically. It's the same thing.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe if Andy, is there any other kind of tests that you feel are quick predictors of impairment or fatigue or anything like that? This test actually sounds quite interesting, but are you aware of anything else that you may recommend to the audience for those doing safety-sensitive work?
That's the first one by far. You can Google CO2 tolerance test. There are other breathing-related ones. That's just the ones we've tested in our lab. It takes, again, under a minute. There are other ones. To be honest with you, perception is it's pretty good. Just a simple, how do you feel today? Surprisingly, it is actually better than most biomarkers.
Wow.
So it's not the worst thing ever to ask them, like, how do you feel today? Okay, do this test. And then you'll when you do just those two, you can start to actually cancel out false flags. And you get a follow-up. So those are two very simple ones that I will use with every professional athlete. I have some athletes that we track 50-plus markers every day on. But still, one of those markers is, how do you feel today?
Nice.
And guess which one of all those markers carries the heaviest weight in my algorithm?
How do you feel, huh?
It's big.
Wow.
How do you put it this way? And I'll stop talking. How do you feel is simply perception, right? The CO2 is not perception. So when you do the perceptive one and then you do the physiological one, now it's sort of like, if you say I feel great, but then I'm looking at your CO2 and your CO2's in the tank, I know you're just being tough, right? Or you're not being aware, or you're not being, actually paying attention to what's happening. Or the opposite, right? It's like, I feel terrible and your CO2 tolerance is super high. I can be like, all right, suck it up, get out there. Like, you're in the wrong mind frame. And then I can, show them a Rocky video and like they're right back to it or whatever, right? So it gives you a quick diagnostic of, is this physiological or is this psychological?
That's really interesting. Dr. Curte, I don't think you've met him. He's our psychologist, and he's helping us develop some resiliency and mental health screenings, and that he's totally aligned with what you've said on the psychological perspective, and really that's one of our major components of our resiliency score is how do you feel today. And so again, it in many ways I think the layman out there might feel like this isn't very scientific, but it looks like there's a lot of evidence behind it, because you have so many metrics in some of your elite clientele that it's really reassuring to hear that.
Yeah, sorry, if you want to go real tech too, I got tech solutions for you, like all day. We can actually pick up big signs of how do you phrase this? Basically, if strong predictions of a very panic attack, suicidal tendencies, we can pick those up from your phone. So we can actually see based on activity with your phone in your pocket. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to log on. And major episodes, panic attacks, things like that, we can pick up. In fact, you can pick up, the study was actually done out of Dallas. You can pick up upcoming panic attacks up to 90 minutes before they happen by simply measuring CO2. And so this idea of like panic attacks being out of the blue, they're very rarely out of the blue. They're typically very predictable and very easy to identify. The suicide thing is even better with that takes a lot more tech. But we have that technology. In fact, we're doing the thing with the DoD right now with a whole bunch of folks on that. But that is a simple app you can get effectively on your phone, and it runs you things. And you're going to get basically a thing will go back to your supervisor and be like, hey, you need to go check in on Scott. Something's going on. You're like, what? And you can run there. So there's a bunch of we can get as techy as you want here, or you can just have them breathe for a minute, see how they do.
Interesting.
Amazing. Okay, so I know that we're going to get a lot of questions about this. So talk to us then a little bit more about how that would work. So you're saying it's an app that would maybe be on your phone, but is it tracking like activity? What specifically is that tracking?
There's not a lot I can tell you about that. Not a lot I'm allowed to tell you. I'll put it that way. I can tell you, but
gotcha. Okay.
It's looking at a combination of factors. Is the answer? Okay. It's looking at activity. It's looking at use. It's looking at actually positioning stuff as well. And it's been validated in multiple studies. Again, it's not going to tell you if you're kind of like having a bummy day, but it's looking for this is really bad. Check, like you need to check in with this person. And then actually with these solutions are, it's basically, think of it kind of like telehealth, where it's not just like a flag, but then it's also a very structured solution program. We've actually done this a lot with athletes, fighters, and NFL players over the years, just the hard way, if you will. And then it was sort of just like, why don't we build this into tech? And it turned out it worked very well. And then the military applications were so strong, they were like, give this immediately to us. And so running your first study up there with those guys. So yeah, you can function, I guess, a bunch of different ways, depending on how you want to set it up. It's pretty good, though.
Wow. You know, you've been talking a fair amount about mental health, and I do appreciate your thoughts about there's really no difference. But is there some very easy or quick wins for improving someone's physical health? Also, just kind of thinking of someone who's maybe not actively on an exercise program, but is still fairly active at work. How do you get someone to be more productive at work and more resilient with regard to maybe injury prevention? Is there any kind of quick wins for the non-athlete?
Yeah. So the way you want to think about this is physiology works under some very small idioms, like very small. And one of them being stress, right? So stress is not a bad thing. Stress is what causes adaptation. This is how you get better, you improve, you change pathways in your brain, how you think, how you remember, decision-making. You learn a new task, you learn new protocols. These are all because of stress, right? So stress is a good thing. But when you outkick your coverage, right? So when your total stress amount exceeds your ability to handle stress, we start going backwards. Okay, so if you ask yourself then, what are the largest contributors to general stress? You want them coming in the directions of stress that you want, and you do not want them then building up in areas you don't want. So you want stress from things like attention. You want stress from accomplishing very difficult tasks, because those actually are very rewarding. We've done things. Those are positive stressors. You want high-quality nutrition and hydration, positive stressors. If you do that, you can work harder. You can do more of those things because your total stress bucket's not full. If you have stress coming in other directions, like cigarette smoking, poor sleep, excessive psychological stress, then the total amount of stress you can get from the other side goes down because your bucket is only so large, and then you start spillover. When the spillover happens, you start making bad health decisions, you start making bad life decisions, and what we call your physiological resilience, it breaks. So your body armor shrinks. This is when you see people in the workplace take a step and tear an Achilles. Like, how in the heck I took a step and I blew an Achilles. That's a very classic sign of total stress load being really, really high. I reached up and grabbed the thing off the counter, and all of a sudden my shoulder went out. There's not a lot we can do with, a canister fell over that's 800 pounds and hit my leg. Okay, fine. But the very small things of like, God, my back just blew out today. Why? These are the reasons why, because you have very low, you get exposed to a very mild viral load and you get extremely sick. Things like that, right? These are all partially, at least, certainly not the only thing, but partially because of your resilience being low. So to answer your question directly, the single biggest contributor to excessive stress in the direction we do not want, especially in these environments, it's always sleep. It is by far, like, I could talk to you about quality nutrition all you want. No one's going to really do it, right? I could talk to you about drinking more water. They just don't really do it. I could talk to you about other stress management stuff, and people may do some of that stuff. But the biggest one that people will move the needle on a little bit is sleep, because it's so visceral. It hurts so bad when you don't have it. You feel it the entire day. You don't feel necessarily that you didn't have enough fiber in your lunch. So we tend to focus on the ones that give you the most physical, because people are more willing to change those things. Because if you have one night of better sleep, all of a sudden you're like, wow, I don't hate my life today. I don't want to do that again. And so
I treat it like I treat it like a kid. Like I put myself to bed. Like your little toddler. I actually get to that point where I know I'm like, sleep will solve it all, and I actually treat myself like my 2-year-old. Like, okay, you need to go to bed. Like, you need to start over, go to sleep. It'll solve everything. I wake up the next morning and it's magic. I just reset my whole brain and body in a single night.
Yeah, we have plenty of athletes who set sleep alarms. I have plenty of people that I work with, scientists that set sleep alarms, right, and just like, go to bed. Okay.
To go to bed. Wow. That's really interesting, because I think the old school thought on this was the exercise was the most important thing when you're trying to look at your overall health. And then I think things have evolved over the years to where I at least look at it as kind of your health is kind of like a 3-legged or 4-legged stool, where you have sleep, nutrition, exercise, and maybe like spiritual health as a 4th prong. But could you grade the 3 potentially? It sounds like sleep is definitely number 1, but if people were trying to decide, I only have so much time or mental energy to focus on improving those 3 factors, could you kind of grade which 3 are the most or kind of tier them, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, the question does make sense, but I can't answer it.
Okay.
I would say that sleep is the one. The other 3, it's totally individualized. So some people, the entire mental side of the equation is everything. Like, the joke we always say is, we will put people through unbelievably extensive and comprehensive physiological analysis, and we come back after months and say, hey, you need a multivitamin and a therapist. Like, sometimes it is really, there are other things we found, of course, but we try to prioritize, even with the professional athletes, like, this is where you're going to move the needle. So for one person, you really might just need to sleep some more. And that might be like, actually, and we can come to everything else later. Some people it might be, you need a little more sleep, but your diet is just wrecking every part about your health. Others, it is simply the movement stuff, or handling the stuff. So it really does depend on the individual, which I think actually sounds like a non-answer, but the way to frame this appropriately is, sleep is central to everybody. I've just not seen people who can get away with poor sleep across time. It just doesn't happen. Outside of that, between those other 3 areas, you have the freedom to make massive physiological changes in any of those areas by focusing on just one at a time. That's all you have to do. whatever is the most accessible to you, whatever is the most interesting, whatever is the most passionate, whichever one you think you will actually accomplish the most, you can reach tremendous improvements in your physical health by just focusing on one at a time and really pushing that. So what we typically do is think about this across a year and say, okay, for quarter one or wherever, however you like to break your year up, I'm just going to focus on my mental health. That doesn't mean you're not working out and stuff and everything else when you can, but the priority of the physical side of your life is that. Quarter two, now we're going to move over to nutrition or whatever the case may be, right? So just making it very simple. And it's just like, I'm just going to focus on this for a long time. And I'm not going to try to do 20 things at once, because when you do that, nothing ends up happening. And it becomes overwhelming because people aren't professional athletes, right? Life takes over, kids take over, jobs, etc. So sleep is typically like a non-negotiable with me. And I'm not going anywhere until we can get that recovered. But after that, it's sort of like, hey, we could play in any of these areas, but which one would you realistically do or most interested in? And then let's go there. And if it takes 6 months, fine. Like it takes a whole year. It's fine. But I promise you, if people improve their sleep and one of those 3 areas, and that's all they did for a year, it would be unrecognizable at the end of that year about how much better they feel.
Hey, Andy, I think that you're Holly, you feel targeted? Yeah.
Targeted.
That was for you, ex-ER nurse. Got to get some sleep, lady.
Yeah.
I think that just if I could sum it up, I think the way I've heard you say this over time, and your point about 6 months or year, like we don't have a time limit on this, is that there's no shortcuts here. And I think that it's really easy to want the shortcut or the easy fix, but when it comes to your health and your physiology, there's no shortcut really. And when the way I've also heard you describe things like exercise and different things is so much of this is getting you to the 80%. And I think Scott and I talk about this a lot too. You can kind of get everybody to this 80%. And your point about the nuances between what would affect somebody differently, like we are all in very different places in our health and wellness journey. And so that it's those margins, it's those pieces that once you've kind of addressed if you've addressed your sleep, you've addressed your nutrition, you've addressed your exercise, you've addressed your mental health, and you're still having challenges, that's where you really need to dig into data and the tweaks and how do I deal with the 20% versus most of us are still in this 80% chunk that just need to sleep a little bit more or just need to maybe move a little bit more. And it really is as simple sometimes as that, but it's the repetitiveness and doing it every day and making it something that is just there is no shortcut to really.
Yep. Or like a really easy solution we do is a cold hard conversation of what is the absolute worst thing you're doing for physical health right now? Right? What is the absolute worst one? Tell me what that is. Put a sticky note on, put that on your computer. That's it. That's all I want you to think about. That 6 months. No, you don't get a macro cycle. You don't get a diet plan. I'm not going to tell you how many electrolytes. No, you have the one thing that is the worst habit or activity you have right now. And all I want you to do is fix that for 6 months.
So Holly, that's your Coca-Cola addiction.
Okay, so now you got sleep, we've got the Pepsis. I'm definitely targeted. Like definitely. I think that was the setup, Tara.
Holly, it's an intervention. We're not telling you that you need to have a sticky note for your soda addiction.
This isn't even actually a webinar, Holly. This is just an intervention.
It's just us.
This is all this is.
It's just us.
There's nobody actually here. Your family's going to come over through the door in a second, and they're going to give you a hug, and this is what this is about.
Well, we targeted Dara a few webinars ago on a different topic, so this one's
They
for
targeted
Holly.
me on high-functioning anxiety, so your points about stress and anxiety, I was very much targeted on that webinar, so now it's Holly's turn. Surprise.
Hey, look, I'm all in favor for shaming as a coaching tool. All in favor of it.
Listen. Okay, hi, my name's Holly, and I have a problem. Okay, I'm here. All right, Andy. So, Dr. Galphin, I'll go with Dr. Galphin. We do have several. I want to make for sure that we get these because there's some that are really good. So, I want to make for sure that we cover what Tim's question was. Tim's wanted to make sure we had it in the right format. Are there any studies or association between individuals who regularly practice mindfulness and or relaxed breathing techniques and an increased ability to recognize the signs and symptoms of heat-induced illness, so increased body attunement? That's
I can't speak to that specifically. So whether or not it can address heat related illness, I don't know. That's a very good question. I would say globally, the answer is I would put my marker in. Yeah, you're going to find close enough. Again, I don't know about specifically recognizing heat, but you're generally going to find mindfulness or any related activity to be at worst neutral, at best very impactful and very powerful across a number of global health issues. So to me, it is a very low risk. There's almost no chance of it going bad or poor, and has a very strong potential to go anywhere from a moderate to very powerful tool. So I can't, but I don't know specifically about heat. It will, in general, it gives people greater sensation, or they get more fine-tuned to their own sensation. So you see things like I was referring to earlier when you'll ask an athlete, how do you feel? And they'll tell you the same every day, right? After time, when they actually start paying attention, they'll start to realize, whoa, wow, there's a difference between like 5 and 8, right? So one thing you can actually do on this is if you ask people how they feel today, if you use something like a scale of 1 out of 10, do not ever allow them to pick 7.
Ooh.
Because everyone picks 7. No one wants to commit to 8. 8's pretty damn good, right? Like 8, you really feel good. 6 sucks. So everyone picks 7. So 7's gone. You have to commit. Like you feel tremendous. And the difference between 6 and 8, people feel. Difference between 7 and 8, they don't know. 7, 6. So you make them go like, where are you at? 6 or lower, whatever. If you go like scale of 1 to 5, same thing with 3. 3 is out. You got to commit to 4 or 2. That's just how it works. Those are your only options.
Okay. All right. Next one came, let's see, Belgian Roofing Company was asking, is there such thing as an annual functional capacity exam? Sadly, there are some members of our workforce that are aging. Their hearts are in the right place, but their physical abilities or diminished lack of put them at risk for injury. Really good point. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, that's not I don't deal with healthcare, so I don't know about that. I don't know if you two have better thoughts.
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Sure.
Yeah, and so, functional capacity evaluations essentially look at, they look at the essential functions of each job. And so you can have multiple functional capacity evaluations for one organization. And a lot of clients use them for pre-placement, but I also think they're great for periodic as well. It's a great way of assessing people's ability to do work objectively. And it can also identify some weaknesses that can be addressed through other programs like work hardening or other kind of rehabilitative programs. And it really sets up that employee for continued success. And so I'm definitely an advocate for those.
For sure.
And I will have to say that as we've thought about incorporating mental health into this, it is a very kind of a leading edge thing. I don't think most employers add in, from a functional or job duty standpoint, the components around mental health, and I think more and more are starting to consider it. You would have to really build that into an overall program, your job description. It would have to be policy-based, and you'd have to be able to explain what a baseline function is. But I think a lot of employers are starting to consider that as part of their kind of annual process, or at least a more regular process. What do you think about that, Scott?
Well, Dara, yeah, exactly. I've dealt with military kind of fitness for duty mental health screens, which are very focused and well defined. But, after talking to Andy today with how closely connected mental and physical is, there may not be a hard threshold for mental health fitness for duty for most jobs that aren't especially safety sensitive. But I've seen that in the clinic as well. If someone has a strong mindset about they're going to recovery from this injury, a lot of times they're going to recover well before the average person will, and vice versa. Yeah. If their stress bucket, as Andy said, is quite full, they actually may have a delayed recovery. And so I do think it's going to be more and more synergistic as we look at the whole person and not just the physical or just the mental in isolation.
Good stuff.
Great points.
Okay. The other one I was going to ask about, and Andy, sorry, I've opened up Pandora's box. I'm always looking for the story inside the story here. But anyways, looks like Sherry is asking as well. She says, I have fibromyalgia and this affects my physical and mental health. Would this app, I assume that's the app I was asking you about and trying to get your secret information on, would that be considered for testing on folks like me? And this is specifically a question for Andy.
Again, you get start getting into clinical stuff, and I can't speak to that. Yeah. So fibromyalgia, I don't know. I don't know if there's applications there. I don't think so. My gut is probably not, but
okay. We'll follow up, Sherry. We'll keep an eye on him. We'll return to this and ask again later. Okay, let's see. Dr. Curtay had spoken up and said, "Indeed, I am totally aligned," when asking about how they're doing. And then let's see, we also had one from Mark Smithson Associates, the best way to measure and quantify the quality of sleep. Really good question.
Oh boy. All right. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. You said stories, right? You want stories. I can do stories here. Everything is on a gradient in terms of general to individualized, right? So do you want the highest quality answer possible, or do you want something that can be used across tens of thousands of people?
We want English.
Well, of course. Well, I'm going to give you all English, but it's just going to be usability, right? So if you want to look at something like wearable tech, to this date, there is no evidence at all, or in fact, the evidence is quite strong that most wearable tech is going to give you very poor answers for sleep stages. So in other words, don't use your ring or watch and think you're getting a reasonable assessment of how much deep sleep you got or REM sleep. In fact, sleep doesn't even work like that. So those are poor. However, things like an Oura ring specifically is pretty decent at telling you things like total time. It's also decent at telling you what time you fell asleep. So those are, and because I think that question was total sleep is the first one. When it comes back to like the lowest hanging fruit for sleep, the two things you want to pay attention to are total amount of time and consistency. And so it is very, very important, even if you're under hours, that you're trying to sleep in a plus or minus 60 is what we call it. So if you go to bed in an ideal world at 10 p.m., don't go to bed at 1 a.m. the next night, and then 6 p.m. the night, and then don't be just thrown all over the board. That is, even if you have the same amount of total time, or if you have great total time and great quality, inconsistent schedule is going to make you feel terrible. So consistency, number one. Most Whoop or Oura or things like that are going to be reasonable at telling you that. Total amount of time is the second metric you want to get, right? And if you just stop right there, you have decent stuff. Just ignore the sleep stages. Don't worry anything about them. Now, the Oura did just release a brand new version, and apparently they have new data. But we'll see. We'll see if it stands up to actual external studies. It may. The first ones didn't, so we'll see. If you want to go completely nuts and do solutions like one of my companies, Absolute Rest, then we can come into a house, into an individual bedroom, and run a full what's called polysomnography. This is a full clinical grade sleep study on people in their own individual house. This is a full psychological screener for anxiety and depression and other things. It's a full octave, so we're measuring brain scan. We're looking at acute and chronic sleep deprivation on the brain. We can see caffeine use. We can see THC use. We can see a whole bunch of stuff. This is what we use with the astronauts, by the way, and with SpaceX. So we can run that full brain scan. We can see previous concussions, TBIs, things like that. We're taking full biomarkers, and then we're taking full environmental scans of the room for volatile organic compounds like formaldehyde coming out of their bed or other things coming out of their mattress, pollens and allergens in the air. We're looking at total amount of sound, total amount of light. We're looking at dandruff, CO2 cloud building up. CO2 cloud is incredibly important. It's when they exhale, CO2 comes out, and too much of that sticks around their face. They rebreathe it back in. And remember, actually, I talked about CO2 earlier. Well, if you breathe back in CO2, that shoots you into anxiety. So it doesn't even wake you up, but you get knocked out of sleep stages and move around. So you can run a full diagnostic and figure out exactly how you're sleeping. And with all those other metrics, we can identify exactly why you're sleeping that way. So that is, like, if you want to actually know your sleep, you have to go polysomnography. So you can do a sleep study in a clinic, but people don't go to those. They're super expensive, and they're not in your own bed. And they're also not telling you why you're sleeping that way. They're just telling you you have terrible sleep, and you're still sort of left with no solution. But the more deployable solution is at least get them going on total sleep and a plus or minus 60. So try to keep their sleep and wake schedule within 60 minutes across most nights. And if you do that 80% of the time, like Dara said, you be in a pretty good spot.
Wow. So do you want to comment then on a sleep range, like what range they should be going for, like how many hours a night? That seems to be
the cliche, right? 8 hours is probably the minimum that you want to get after. Some people are okay at 7:45. Some people, like myself, I don't do as well on anything under 8:20. For whatever reason, 8:20 is just like a weird number for me. So if you want to just call it 8 hours, it's a reasonable starting place. Here's what I can tell you. 6 is never going to be the answer. It's not. Like 6 does not work. Them. Everyone thinks they're fine. It's not.
Definitely not.
Here's what I can tell you.
You're right.
I may have joked with you guys about this on the pre-call, but I have these data with athletes. We also have these on performers. So you make money making decisions, basically, and you track that against your sleep. Sorry about barking dogs in the background. But you will see a direct line between worst days of sleep and worst decisions that cost you a lot of money. In your realm, you'll see this in injury. We see this in bad decisions. We see this in bad play. We see this in golfers. I have a PGA guy right now, so I'm thinking about golf. Like all the little things, you're going to make more mistakes. You're going to have to repeat your work. You're going to have to come back and edit things. You're not going to write as well. You pick a metric, and I'll tell you, a single night of sleep is not a big deal. So you have one crummy night of sleep, it won't do much. We can sleep on 2 hours and go, actually, you're not going to see that much decrement. It is the slow burn that is by far more important. Like that is going to train wreck your decision making. In the context of this conversation, that means injury in the workforce. That means less productivity. That means less money, costs more money. You got to redo things, quality control, all that stuff. So you really want to get a tackle on chronic sleep. And again, by chronic, I just mean 80+%. Yeah, you can go out occasionally on Friday, etc., but you got to give me 85% of the time or more.
You know, we see, I think, historically, there's a culture of, I don't know if it's toughness or just being hard, where in the military, we all started out with very little sleep from boot camp, and it never really stopped. I just recently saw the military published a field manual for sleep and napping. You may have been involved with that, but do you have any pointers potentially to help change culture against kind of the just suck it up and deal with lack of sleep? Because I have seen this across the military, Fortune 500 companies, blue collar workers, white collar. It seems to be an American trait, but I'm not sure.
So the way to kind of think about this is it's the equivalent of why you teach your 7-year-old not to have ice cream for breakfast, right? It's immediate versus delayed gratification. Yeah, like you can burn it down right now and you will get more done. You will make more money right now. And that's immediate gratification. But what you're doing by having ice cream every day is going to lead to downstream problems. It's the same damn thing, right? So I'm actually, like, I probably should admit this, but I'm totally fine with short-term, just complete sleep deprivation. You're just going to have to do that at some point in your life where you just, like, work gets nuts, or family, you get baby, like whatever, where you're going to go through these small batches of like, I just got to hustle. I actually like that. I think it's really helpful when people just bear down and really get and see what they're made of, kind of thing. Only if that gets matched with recovery. Just like in a professional athlete, right? Like you're going to go to the gym, you're going to bust your butt, and you're going to like work really hard, and then you're going to recover. You cannot just train. Like we've seen that story play out. You cannot just eat ice cream every day. You cannot drink booze every single day. Like it just doesn't work, right? You can do it from here, have some fun, but you have to match it with recovery. And so when we look at this year-long idea or quarter-long idea, if you go, hey, look, this quarter, like we got to get some stuff done. We're building this company, or we're going to lose this company, or we got this big project. Cool. I'm down for it as long as then you have a plan the next quarter to rebuild sleep, to rebuild habits. We front load sleep and a lot of professional athletes prior to season because they're going to be traveling in the NBA every couple of days, or maybe baseball. jet lag constantly. So that's fine. I'm good with all that. I'm not thinking like you're going to get 9 hours of sleep every day the rest of your life. That's just not realistic. It's not necessary. But you do need to have a plan for rebuild and recovery. If you do that, then I'm good here. One last comment on that to make sure people don't twist my word. You cannot repay sleep debt in the sense that you cannot just sleep 4 hours a night throughout the week, and the sleep you're going to sleep 12 hours Saturday, Sunday, and you're fine. Absolutely does not work that way. It won't. You need to be very, very consistent, and repaying these things takes weeks.
So it's a loss of opportunity then.
Totally. So the way that I say it, to directly answer your question, is you're costing yourself money. Because you're going to repeat stuff, you're going to have errors, you're going to burn people out, you're going to lose them, you have to rehire, retrain. That is very expensive stuff. So if you have a little short-term thing where you just got to have everyone lock in, okay, I got it. But if that's your practice, you're doing the equivalent of eating ice cream every day for breakfast.
Gotcha.
And that's where that goes. I know where this goes. Where this goes is you lose money.
Yeah.
That's as simple as this needs to be.
So we can market it as the ice cream principle. We can start putting it out there.
For sure.
I'm so targeted about the ice cream, but I won't bring it up anymore.
Yeah. Okay, one more. Stacy Johnson from Occidental Oil and Gas Corporation was asking any tips on how to shut your mind off when it's time to go to sleep. That's a big one, too.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a handful of solutions here.
Okay.
The very first one is we call a state shift. And so you have to, your brain can work in one of two ways. Number one is you can simply calm, which is great. So down regulation breathing is a very effective method. There are all kinds of ways to down regulate in your breath. I would recommend an app. It's fairly cheap, called XPT. Full disclosure here, I'm a part of that company. I have been since day one, but it has an app. It has a whole bunch of down regulation breathing routines in it. They're very short. They just guide you through it. And they're pre-sleep routines specifically to get you through there. If you want to just do them on your own, you can do a couple of simple ones. Number one is just try to breathe through your nose only as much as you can. But try to exhale longer than you're inhaling. So if you count and it takes you 3 seconds to inhale, try to take a 6-second exhale. If it takes you 4 seconds to inhale, exhale for 8. So try to double the exhale time. That's a very simple one. Another one is called box breathing. So inhale for some amount of time, call it 4 seconds. Hold it for some amount of time, which is the same, right? So 4, 4. So inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Those are your 4 sides of your box, and keep those 4 sides the same length. So 4 seconds, 4 seconds, 4 seconds, or 5, 5, 5, or whatever. So down regulation breathing. There are a ton of other ways. There's all kinds of, in fact, I think Netflix has a show you can go onto that downregulate breathes you. There's all kinds of apps on there. Super simple. The second way, which is sometimes better for more active minds, is what we call lean into it. And so it's the equivalent of telling your toddler or your kid not to do something. It doesn't work very well. Like, hey, don't play with that. Don't play with this. Don't play with the better solution is tell them what you want them to do, right? So tell your brain what you want it to do, which is another way of saying, and try to telling it, calm down. Don't think about this. Don't think about this. That just almost never works, especially if it's a hard problem. Give it a specific task that actually takes a lot of concentration, but it's not the thing you don't want it thinking about. So if it's you're trying to remember, what was that song we played in middle school, and then you're actually really concentrating on something that gives you joy. Concentrate on man, how am I this passion project you're working on? Man, where am I gonna go to get that thing? And so something that is not an anxiety-driven thing, but it takes a lot of focus and concentration, and you'll find very quickly you'll just be gone. So give it something to do rather than just telling it hey, stop thinking, stop thinking. You ever try to tell your brain stop thinking? Anyone that has anxiety is go yourself. Yeah, it'd be nice if it was as simple as stop thinking. That almost never works for these people. So the physiology trick is number one, because that breathing stuff will change your physiology. And that's very important. Trying to just think your way out of anxiety is very difficult. So physiology matters. If that's not enough, then go the lean into the second step, which is thinking about something that brings you more joy, but takes a lot of concentration. I'll do things think about the 1995 Mariners and be like, God, who played second base? And just like, I run through the whole thing. And I'm just like, I'm serious.
I was going to
things
say,
like that, and I'm just gone.
one of the things, quick nerd moment. So a lot of the listeners, I know Dr. Cherry and I have both listened to you on Dr. Huberman's podcast. And I think the number one takeaway I took from that is not just deregulate or kind of bringing yourself down for sleep, but is to do that after any stressful activity, including exercise. And that practice alone is something that has made a big difference because I do a lot of really hard workouts middle of the day. And then all of a sudden I'm going back to work and continuing my day. I've never taken a moment to breathe. And I think just one little takeaway I had from that discussion was it's not just in preparation for sleep at the end of the night. It's taking moments after any stressful or hard activity to kind of come back down to a state of calm and regulation. And I think that's just something, if you can start practicing just little moments, the box breathing, and I think in the podcast you said, even if it's just for a few seconds while you're calming down for the day, do it, because we don't take that extra second to recover. And then all of a sudden we're expected to sleep and to have a normal day and all these other things. And it's almost impossible.
Yeah, you want to do the dog thing, right? Like the dog goes out from a walk, dog goes outside and plays. It comes back and immediately falls asleep. It's just downregulated, right? It doesn't like walk around. It just lands on the couch. It is asleep in seconds after hard exercise. That's what it does, right? It's trying to downregulate. Stressful meeting, whatever. Even if it's 20 seconds, close your eyes and just breathe.
Okay, that's our next gift that we need to make. That we need to make is the dog that says that you go to sleep. I love it. I love all of it. We're at time here. We have one. Tim was asking if you could say the name of the breathing app one more time that you were talking about.
XPT stands for Extreme Performance Training. It's a terrible name, but it's XPT app. XPT Life, I think, is the name of it. XPT Life.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fantastic. I can't say thank you enough. Anything else anybody wants to share before we wrap up here?
I've just never heard somebody thank a group so much for an intervention. I appreciate your willingness to be intervened on, Holly.
Hey, yeah, like the mark is here. Yes, like I'm just waiting for all the lights to come for sure. Yeah, the whole camera crew.
We appreciate the vulnerability. We appreciate the vulnerability, Holly. No, I really appreciate everybody joining us today, and thank you all for spending the time.
Agree completely. All right, if you haven't, please make sure that you press that register now button for the next event where we're going to talk about some of these, maybe driving us to some of these horrible events that are occurring. Thank you again. Have a great day, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye. Okay.